Ladies and gentlemen, we will have two Lord Chamberlains this evening, el Rey Primero, Feo Cicero, and el Rey Vigésimo, Simón N. Canasí.
Bienvenidos, señoras y señores. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome you to the 22nd Annual Coronation Ball of the crew of the Knights of Santiago.
Several crew members traveled to Spain this summer as part of Tampa's Sister City program. While there, they learned that since July 25, the Feast of St. James the Apostle fell on a Sunday, 1993 was declared a holy year. They were so impressed with the historical basis for our crew and the beauty of Santiago de Compostela, the world's third holy city after Rome and Jerusalem, it was decided that the theme of this year's coronation would be El Camino de Santiago.
The early conversion of Spain to Christianity is attributed to the missionary zeal of St. James the Apostle, a disciple of Christ. Traveling the length and breadth of Spain, he converted thousands from paganism to Christianity. During the height of his ministry, he was summoned to Jerusalem in the year 44 and was beheaded by Herod Agrippa.
James' followers carried his body back to Spain, his adopted land, and laid him to rest in the region of Galicia in northwestern Spain. And this shrine became a place of pilgrimage for those early Christian people.
The next 800 years saw Spain suffer under the heavy hand of war. Rome and Carthage swept across the land, and it was far too dangerous to be known as a Christian, let alone make a pilgrimage. So the grave of St. James lay unattended and forgotten.
The Moors came out of the east. The Romans fled before the hordes. Arabs and Berbers came to Spain, and she was brought to her knees. Christians fled to Gaul, renounced their faith or died for the sake of it, but some Christians hid in the mountains of Cantabria and carried on their belief.
Then, in the reign of Alfonso the Chaste, a hermit monk who lived in a cave saw an enormous star hovering over the hills. He followed it and came to a field ablaze with little stars burning in the bushes. A strange, distant music floated above. There in the undergrowth, he discovered a small shrine, an altar, and a sarcophagus. It was the tomb of Santiago, St. James.
It was confirmed that this was truly the place of his burial. The king declared that a church be built on the site, and the town of Santiago rose around it.
There followed 400 years of terrible wars, and in the 12th century, the Christian forces were being badly beaten. Defeat was inevitable, but amid the roar and screams of battle at Clavijo, there appeared a vision of St. James astride a horse, carrying a flag with a cross emblazoned upon it.
The Christian soldiers were suddenly able to overcome the impossible odds, and they delivered a blow to Islam from which it never recovered. St. James, Santiago, became the patron saint of Spain.
Pilgrims made the long journey to the grave of St. James. Bandits, cutthroats, highwaymen, and the like roamed the trails and murdered and plundered the pilgrims along the way.
Out of the countryside came knights in search of adventure. Their sole purpose was the defense of good and right. Meeting along the route of the pilgrims, the knights banded together to afford protection to the weary travelers. As the years passed, respect grew for the growing band of knights whose strong hands and flashing swords struck terror into anyone threatening the pilgrims. The people began to speak of the knights as the Knights of Santiago, and their deeds culminated in the founding of the Royal Order of St. James, Cofradía de Caballeros de la Orden Real de Santiago.
Just as this order in Spain has contributed to the growth and prosperity of that country, so too the crew of the Knights of Santiago in Tampa has dedicated itself to the perpetuation and enhancement of the proud Latin heritage and culture.
The board of directors of the crew of the Knights of Santiago unanimously passed a resolution bestowing the title of Director Emeritus on the four remaining founders. The late Cesar Gonzmart was voted Director Emeritus several years ago. Captain of the Knights, Fernando Noriega, will now bring forth these honored crew founders. El Rey Cuarto, Henry J. Fernandez. El Rey Séptimo, Joe C. Granda. Knight Joseph R. Lopez Sr. and El Rey Décimo Cuarto, Daniel F. Martinez.
Another chapter in our crew's history is coming to an end. Our 1993 Royal Court has served us well, and our crew has continued to prosper during this year. It is with much pride and pleasure that we present the 1993 Royal Court.
La Dama de la Corte, Diana Margaret Sanchez, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Alberto Sanchez, escorted by Squire Joseph Vincent Ferraro, son of Mr. and Mrs. Vincent Ferraro.
La Dama de la Corte, Carmen Gloria Mayea, daughter of Dr. and Mrs. Victor Mayea, escorted by Squire Robert Elliott Austin Jr., sponsored by Mr. and Mrs. Ellen Dotson.
La Dama de la Corte, April Michelle Foster, sponsored by Mr. and Mrs. Renee Zarat, escorted by Squire Daniel J. Aya, son of Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Aya.
La Dama de la Corte, Terry Eileen Dotson, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Eileen Dotson, escorted by Squire Mark Caldevilla, sponsored by Mr. and Mrs. Alan Dotson.
It is my pleasure to present His Royal Majesty El Rey Vigésimo Primero Luis of the House of Menendez y la Reina Jennifer, Luis and Mary's lovely daughter. This father-daughter sovereign team is a first for the crew. Sword bearer to His Majesty is Thomas Peter Martino Jr., son of Mr. and Mrs. Tom Martino.
Pages to the King are Christopher Lee Watts, son of Mr. and Mrs. David Watts. Sam Anthony Leto Grinnell, sponsored by Mr. and Mrs. Alan Dotson. Anthony Andrew Manna, grandson of Knight and Mrs. Manuel Manna.
Her Majesty's pages are Nicholas Joseph Castellano II, grandson of Knight and Mrs. Peter Castellano. Alexander Michael Canassi, son of El Rey Vigésimo, Simon Canassi and Selena Canassi, and grandson of El Rey Décimo Quinto and Mrs. Renee Huesca. William Franklin Bowles, grandson of Mrs. Violeta Murgado and the late Frank Murgado.
It gives me great pleasure at this time to introduce the 1993-94 Barón of the Crew of the Knights of Santiago, Baron Vigésimo Dan Stangline. Ladies and gentlemen, once again it gives me great pleasure to introduce the 93-94 Baron of the Crew of the Knights of Santiago, Barón Vigésimo Dan Stangline.
Lord Chamberlain, we ask you to call forth the Captain of the Knights, Knight Fernando Noriega, who has the names of those señores of our crew who through their dedication and hard work have demonstrated that they are worthy of joining the respected fraternity of the Knights of Santiago.
Captain of the Knights, Knight Fernando Noriega, please step forward and do the King's bidding.
By command of El Rey Luis, I summoned Dennis Alvarez to come forward. By command of el Rey Luis, I summons Randy Conte to come forward. By command of el Rey Luis, I summon Anthony Economo to come forward. By command of el Rey Luis, I summon Mark Stephen Hannity to come forward. By command of the King Luis, I summon Jesus Francisco Lima to come forward. By command of el Rey Luis, I summon Paul John Sierra to come forward.
My faithful sword bearer Thomas, hand me the royal sword of Santiago. Por la gracia de Dios y la gloria de España y por la orden de Santiago, os investos, caballeros de la orden de Santiago. Arise, Sir Knights, and take your place. Por la gracia de Dios y la gloria de España y por la orden de Santiago, os investos, caballeros de la orden de Santiago. Arise, Sir Knights. Hold on.
I know he went down too many two-steps too and messed me up. Put it on backwards.
Arise, Sir Knights, and take your place. Take your places with our Brotherhood of Knights.
Your Majesties, your royal subjects feel that you both have ruled us well this year. You have truly added another eventful and most memorable chapter to the history of our crew. Unfortunately, the time draws near when you must abdicate so that the new monarchs who have been chosen by the crew may ascend the throne.
La Reina Jennifer of the House of Menendez, are you ready to remove the crown and pass the scepter to the new queen?
I will do as you request. I have many cherished memories that will always be dear to me. I turn the scepter and crown over to the new queen and leave her with my sincerest best wishes. May her reign be as happy and as memorable as mine has been this year, sharing it with my father.
El Rey Luis of the Royal House of Menendez, are you prepared to abdicate the throne of Santiago?
My accountant says yes. Please say yes. But I say no, never. A king is never ready for his reign and the year of merriment to come to an end. I will have many fond memories for years to come, and I'm sure my bank account will remember the double dose for a long time. I wish my successor the same happiness in ruling as my daughter and I have had. To my faithful subjects and loyal knights, I cry, Viva Santiago!
Que viva Santiago!
Your Majesties, may your lives be full of great pleasure and much prosperity. Please go forth and greet your subjects for the last time, and know that our sincere devotion and esteem go with you.
And now, once again, tradition prevails. Another illustrious chapter in the grand and glorious history of the crew of Santiago comes to a close, and another one begins. La Dama de la Corte, Nicole Danielle Castellano, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Tom C. Castellano. She is escorted by Squire Louis Coton, son of Mr. and Mrs. Luis D. Coton.
La Dama de la Corte, Tricia Nicole Fernandez, daughter of Knight and Mrs. Richard G. Fernandez, escorted by Squire Giuseppe Procopio, sponsored by El Rey Vigésimo and Mrs. Simon M. Canassi.
La Dama de la Corte, Casey Elizabeth Garrison, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. William Garrison, escorted by Squire Christopher D. Iwanaski, sponsored by Mr. and Mrs. Danielle Haya.
La Dama de la Corte, Joanne Lynn Penichet, daughter of Knight and Mrs. Pedro F. Penichet, escorted by Squire Michael Vincent Moradiellos, son of Baron Décimo Sexto and Mrs. Harry Moradiellos.
La Dama de la Corte, Valerie Marie Spoto, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. John P. Spoto, escorted by Squire Rico Casares, sponsored by Baron Decimo Octavo Richard P. Russo Sr. Our crew and our distinguished guests wait on edge to greet our new king and pay him homage. This loyal member has put forth considerable effort to enhance our Latin heritage. I ask you now to pay tribute to our 1994 sovereign. El Rey Vigésimo Segundo Tomás of the Royal House of Timberlake. The sword bearer to His Majesty is Matthew William Nayland, son of Knight and Mrs. William Nayland.
Pages to the king are Carlos G. Pasos and Nicholas G. Pasos, nephews of el Rey XXII and Mrs. Thomas A. Timberlake, and grandnephews of Knight and Mrs. Antonio Carrodeguas. Thomas A. Timberlake III, son of el Rey XXII and Mrs. Thomas A. Timberlake II, and grandson of Knight and Mrs. Antonio Carrodeguas. Royal bears Wilfredo Nicolás Herrera, son of Mr. and Mrs. Perme Herrera. Samuel Lawrence DeBolt, nephew of Knight and Mrs. Casimiro Hernandez.
Por la gracia de Dios, por la gloria de España, y por el orden de Santiago, los investos caballeros, el orden de Santiago. Os corono el rey de Santiago y os transmito poderes soberanos para regir este pueblo.
Good boy, good boy. Good boy, good boy. Hey, hey. Your Majesty, Señoras y Señores, we now have the pleasure of paying tribute to beauty and grace. Please greet and pay homage to La Reina María Elena of the Royal House of Capitano. She is the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Joseph Capitano, granddaughter of Knight and Mrs. Nick Capitano, and sister of La Reina Decimosegunda Celeste Capitano Lazara.
Her Majesty's pages are Joseph Santo Lazara, grandson of Mr. and Mrs. Joseph Capitano. Joseph Provenzano III, cousin of Mr. and Mrs. Joseph Capitano. Mark Enrique Woodruff, son of Mr. and Mrs. Enrique A. Woodruff. Laurel Bears, Ryan Andrew Arena, grandson of Knight and Mrs. Andrew Arena. And Brett Smith, grandson of El Rey Decimo and Mrs. Cosmo Anastasi.
la gracia de Dios y la gloria de España os coronó la reina de Santiago.
Senores y señores, please join me in a toast to our new monarchs. Viva el Rey! Viva la Reina! Viva la Reina!
Your Royal Highnesses, El Barón will now present you with a gift from the crew in recognition of your coronation.
For you, my lord, the traditional king's ring. And for you, my lady, the queen's medallion.
Your Royal Majesties, our band will now present our distinguished guests who wish to pay you homage. In accordance with crew tradition, tokens of your esteem will be tendered them by your grandees. It is with great pleasure that I introduce the wife of our king, Raquel Caradeglas de Timberlake. Escorted by grandees Dr. Rob Shaffey and Dr. Fernando Perez. The parents of our lovely queen, Mr. and Mrs. Joseph Capitano. Escorted by grandees Daniel Tapia and Frank Campisi. My wife, Diana Stengline. Escorted by grandees Ronald M. Levine and Frank Mardeas. The wife of the coronation chair, Mrs. Elise Sierra. Escorted by grandees Daniel Aya and John P. Spoto. President of Las Damas de Santiago, Mrs. Luisa Cisneros. Escorted by grandees Roger Preedy and James D. Urso. Mayor Sandy Friedman of the City of Tampa. Escorted by grandees Arnaldo Hernandez and William J. Terry.
Joe Chaleur, Chair of the County Commission. Escorted by Grandees Carlos Ramirez and Omar Medina. From the crew of Venus, King 29 Venus, Dr. James L. Cassell. And Queen 29 Venus, Natalie Marie Solar. Escorted by Grandees Alan Dodson and Frank Harbor. From the crew of Gasparilla, King 80 Roland Fraser, Queen 80 Evans Barrett Romano. Escorted by Grandees Vincent Ferraro and Nigel Salash. From the crew of Neptune, Neptunus Rex the 14th, Robert Mattioli. Queen Aphrodite the 14th, Carolyn Goldberg. Escorted by Grandees Robert Dickman and Brad Guile. From the Latin American Fiesta, Queen Irene Miranda. Escorted by Grandees Thomas C. Castellano and Ralph O'Hara Jr. From Springtime, Tallahassee, Andrew Jackson, the 23rd, Linwood Taliasaro, Rachel Marcia Taliasaro. Escorted by Grandees Rennie Zarat and William D. Garrison. From the Flyers, Lieutenant Colonel Frank Gassler. Escorted by Grandees Alan Lopez and Vincent J. Mandisi. Your Royal Majesties, that concludes the introduction of distinguished guests. Please go forth to meet your subjects for a night filled with merriment.
Thank you, my Lord Baron. On behalf of my Queen, Maria, and myself, we look forward with great anticipation to our coming year, to the parades, to the debutante ball, and the other fantastic events that will occur during the 1994 cruise season. After the royal processional, we invite you all to join in the additional festivities. Thank you very much.
Señoras y señores, please join me once again in a toast to our new royalty. Viva la Rey! Viva la Reina! Viva Santiago!
Thank you.